Coming to paperback and e-readers this April, Isis: Revenge of the Cyber Goddess. The goddess next door must take on the threat of a deadly digital diva driven to destroy the world in this action-packed all-new Isis series adventure. Get Isis: Revenge of the Cyber Goddess in paperback and e-readers this April. A good comic book writer is like an auto mechanic. Now, most people would take the work of an auto mechanic for granted until they ran into a situation where they had a catastrophic issue with their vehicles. And the same thing is for your good comic book writers. Most people take their work for granted when they pick up their books every month at the comic book store, and they don't appreciate their work until something catastrophic happens where a bad writer practically does damage to a character. Now, a good auto mechanic, they are not about fixing a problem in a vehicle. No, their job is to maintain a vehicle so that it can remain on the road for many years. So, a good auto mechanic, that when they're inspecting a vehicle, they are going to identify a problem in that vehicle and give it and let the owner know all about it so that they can go out here and fix a minor issue before it becomes a catastrophic problem. So a good auto mechanic, when they're in their shop, they are not about fixing major problems. Their primary focus is to take care of minor issues before they become major ones. And the reason why they do that is because they understand the mechanics of that vehicle and they understand how all the parts work together towards keeping the vehicle whole. So when you have a good auto mechanic working on a vehicle, his goal is to deal with the smaller issues so that they don't become larger ones and maintain the whole structural integrity of the vehicle. And the same thing happens when you're dealing with a good comic book writer. Their goal is to deal with minor issues as related to the structure and the form of a story before they wind up doing major damage to the core foundation of a character. So a good comic book writer, when they come on to a comic to start their runs, oftentimes they will start focusing and tackling some minor issues that writers might have left over from a previous run as they're working on maintaining the core integrity of the character, maintaining the core integrity of the character's mission, and maintaining the core foundations of what make this character relatable to readers and make readers care about that character. So when you have a good comic book writer, they are not about making radical changes to a character. They are about trying to maintain the core elements of that character while they are telling their stories. And yes, they can get creative while they tell their stories, but they want to make sure that the core internal mechanics and components that make that story paradigm work remain in place and intact, so that when their run is finished and they pass that character on to the next writer, they can come into that character with the character being in last known good condition. So what the comic book writer wants to do is tell their stories, have their run, but after they finish their run, then hand that character off to the next creator in good condition so that they can go and tell their stories. And the same thing with a good mechanic. A good mechanic, when they are working on a vehicle for a customer, they want to make sure that that vehicle remains in good condition, and they want to make sure that that vehicle remains in good condition so that when it is passed from one customer to the next, that vehicle is remaining on the road in good condition. And when you have a good writer in place, they will maintain the core integrity of the character, maintain the structures as related to the character's mission, maintain structures as related to the character's supporting cast, maintain structures as related to the character's paradigm or model for storytelling, and they will try to maintain the integrity of these elements because they want to provide satisfying stories for the reader during their run, but they also want to leave the character in good condition for the next run. Now, when you have a bad writer, they can cause catastrophic failure on a character, similar to what a mechanic runs into when a customer winds up either mishandling a vehicle or a vehicle is not really maintained very well. And what happens in a situation where a mechanic has to deal with catastrophic issues such as a blown head gasket or having to deal with things like timing chains, that means that the mechanic has to come in and do serious work on that vehicle in order to get it back in driving order. And those costs can become really expensive for a car owner because sometimes when you're dealing with things like head gaskets and timing chains, that means that the engine has to come out of the vehicle, and that's a lot of work to get that engine out of the vehicle in some cases, because that sometimes means you have to drop a subframe or you have to put it on a lift and practically pull and drop the engine, or in some cases you have to pull the entire engine out depending on the vehicle in order to get that engine out, and then you have to go out here and drill all these components off as related to the engine block. That means you have to take the heads straight off the engine block, and that's a lot of hours of labor. And the same thing happens to a comic book writer when they have to work around a series of bad writers. They have to go out here and do the same equivalent of labor that a mechanic has to do on an engine as related to a head gasket or timing chains, and that's a lot of hours of work. In some cases, a writer has to work 6 to 12 issues undoing a lot of the damage a previous writer has done, and that means he has to go out again, take this character from where the bad writer left off, really start to take apart all of the bad story elements, take apart all of the bad plot elements, restructure this character's foundation, and then try to work on rebuilding this character's foundations as related to their core elements, and rebuild their supporting cast, rebuild their plot elements, rebuild their story model, and then set a new direction for said character. And that is a lot of work for a writer like myself to do. When we get assigned or offered a character, we have to come in and practically take apart all of the broken parts that bad writers have left, and then we have to go out here and rebuild said character. And a lot of people don't understand how much work goes into rebuilding a broken character, or rebuilding a broken story model, or rebuilding an entire supporting cast, or practically rebuilding and restructuring a character that resembles something similar to what was core to that character. And these types of, again, work is very hard and, again, very complex, and it's just like an auto mechanic who has to go in and practically take that entire engine apart in an effort to repair it and rebuild it. And in some cases, comic book companies, they don't understand how expensive this type of work is for an auto mechanic. And if they did, they would probably pay their writers more, because when you're out here and you have to practically restructure a character, a story model, rebuild a character so that they are back on track, this is something that, again, is just like a head gasket job or a timing chain job. And if you don't know what you're doing, you can make an even bigger mess, and that bigger mess can cost. Now, when it comes down to some comic characters, a complete rebuild, it may pay off, but in some cases you may have a character who what I call creatively totaled. And a creatively totaled character is where you've had a series of bad writers practically write bad stories, and there's no way for the creator to generate revenue on said character because that character has suffered through so many bad story runs that many readers just don't want to buy this character anymore. And when you have a series of bad mechanics, or you have an engine that's pretty bad, what happens is the engine winds up mechanically totaled, and it costs more to fix the car than the car is actually worth. So intellectual properties, they can wind up becoming creatively totaled when you have a creator who practically doesn't understand the mechanics of writing, doesn't understand the mechanics of storytelling, and doesn't understand the mechanics of structure and form. And if they don't understand these mechanics as related to structure and form, they can wind up creatively totaling a character. And when you have a creatively totaled character, there's not much you can do with that character. Not even a reboot can help a mechanically totaled character or a creatively totaled character, because a creatively totaled character is one that the reader has no interest in buying the books, and no interest in supporting the work, because that character is just damaged beyond repair due to a bad story or a bad structure. And in some cases, some characters are just creatively totaled because they were just created with a bad premise or a bad concept. So there are some characters out there like a Kamala Khan, Ms. Marvel, or the current Captain Marvel that are, as I see it, creatively totaled. And these creatively totaled characters, there's no amount of reboots, no amount of revamps that will save these characters. These characters have damage to their core, they have damage to their story paradigm, they have damage to their mission, and there's not much you can do with these kinds of characters. And the only thing that you can do is total them out and practically send them to the comic book junkyard, because there's nothing anybody can do with that character at that point. Because when you have a character with a blown character premise or core foundation, it's this equivalent of a cracked engine block, a broken head gasket, or busted timing chains. There's not much you can do in those cases, because the cost to repair these issues costs more than what the producers would get as related to the value of that intellectual property, because that intellectual property is not going to generate enough revenue to be able to offset the costs of the creator's need to restructure, and the work that that creator would need to do to rebuild said character would just be astronomical. It would just take so many hours that it just wouldn't be worth it. So most creators, you really need to appreciate a good writer out here. Most editors need to appreciate a good writer out here, because a good writer is the same as a good mechanic. The good writer can keep a quality character in print for many years, and their runs can keep readers reading a character's stories for many years. So the value of a good writer is the same as a good mechanic. If you find a good writer out here and they are crafting really solid stories, you need to appreciate that writer. You need to pay them what they're worth, because a good writer can keep your characters in the hands of readers for decades when they go out here and do their job right. And they can keep readers excited about that character for many years, the same way an auto mechanic can keep a classic car on the road for decades, because they know the ins and outs of that car mechanically. And the same thing for a good writer. A good writer can keep a story or a character in the marketplace and relevant for many years, because they know how to maintain things like the character's core foundation. They know how to maintain the character's structure of their story paradigm. They know how to maintain the character's story model. They know how to maintain the character's integrity. And all of these things are very similar to the core components on an auto engine, like your engine block, your heads, your lifters and cams, your camshaft and crankshaft. All of those elements are core to maintaining an engine so it can stay running on the road. And a good writer is the same thing. When they can keep that story model running for many years in print, and that's why when you hire a good writer, they are worth more than most of your so-called top-tier artists in some cases, because you can go through 3 or 4 artists, but when you have one good solid writer, like for example like a Chris Claremont, they can keep a book like X-Men running for over 100 issues, or a guy like Stan Lee can keep a book like Spider-Man or Fantastic Four running for 100 issues, or guys like the late Mark Gruenwald can keep a book like Captain America running for over 100 issues, because this mechanic maintains the integrity of the character, the core, the mission, the structures of the story, the structures of the story paradigm, the structures of the story model, and the development of the character. This comic book writer can practically keep a comic going for 100 or more issues, and that's why it's important to value a good writer, because a good writer, like an auto mechanic, they bring value because they maintain the structures to keep things running. And when you have a good mechanic, they can keep maintaining things so that you won't wind up having many of the catastrophic failures that we have in comics right now, where characters just can't get a book to go past 25 or 50 issues, or like in the case of an auto mechanic, you just have a car where you're winding up with these catastrophic issues, like your timing chains, your head gaskets, or even worse, the rod knock. And when you get the rod knock, that engine is practically done. And when you have that type of creative catastrophic failure, that means your character is practically totaled, and there's not much any creator can do at that point, because when there are structural issues that are damaged beyond repair, there's not much any sort of professional can do at that point, because that structure, once it's damaged and once that core is damaged, again, it's like a cracked engine block. There's not much any creator can do. You can hire the best writers. Any solid writer is going to tell you there's not much they can do at this point, because the structure of the character story is so damaged that there's nothing that they can be done to recover this character or recover this character's stories. And there's not much anybody can do at this point. And all you have to do is either come up with a new character, come up with a new premise, or come up with something different, because you can't do anything with this character at this point. And you can avoid that kind of catastrophic damage by going out here and hiring a talented and qualified writer who has the skills to understand things like a character's core foundation, a character's mission, a character's story model, and the paradigm that they're following in 3 acts, understanding the role of the supporting cast, and understanding how to set a direction for those characters where you're going to tell fresh new tales while maintaining the integrity of that character's core and that character's mission. And when you have a good writer, they will go out here and do that kind of work. Most people will not see that work, and they don't. And when a good writer is doing that work, you're not going to see it, but you're going to enjoy the stories. And most people will enjoy the stories until a bad writer does something catastrophic. And that's why it's important to go out here and invest in a good writer, because a good writer is going to pay off in the future, and they're going to pay off in that long term by allowing you to build your fan base, build your readership, and build an audience over time. Now, if you want to see me make more videos like this, you can donate to my Patreon, my PayPal, and my Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to try some of my books, like the ISIS series, the E-Steam series, the John Hay series, and the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, or my first comic, Easting No Good Deed, you can head over to Amazon and pick up all of those books in paperback and Kindle format. You can also find some of them on Smashwords, the iBook Store, and Google Play. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe.
Now available on Kindle, E-Steam No Good Deed. The Devilish Diva scares some stick-up kids straight in this action-packed E-Steam series comic. Get E-Steam No Good Deed on Kindle for 99 cents today.